Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a very exciting event. DJ Palmer is here with his third fabulous, I don't know whether to call it a thriller or a novelist suspense, but I'll let Lee and Mr. Palmer talk about that, called The Perfect Daughter. And let's see, his two previous books, The New Husband and Saving Megan. But in fact, DJ Palmer has a more interesting history, which Mr. Child will discuss with him. So I don't think I need to introduce Lee Child to you. In fact, I'd just be wasting time. But would you like me to say something enormously praiseworthy and plummy, or would you like me to shut up and hand it over to you?
Whichever works, anything works for me.
I will mention that we do have autographed copies of The Perfect Daughter somewhere in transit between Mr. Palmer and the Poison Pen. I urge you to order one because I think it's going to be a very big, popular book, but I also think it's a terrific read. And that's the real reason for ordering the book, not the fact that it's, whatever. And Patrick will reappear in about 30-40 minutes to answer questions. So if you have any, please put them in the comments field on Facebook, and he'll also put a buy link in for The Perfect Daughter so you can find it there. And with that, Mr. Child, I'm turning this over to you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Lovely to be with you again, especially with the artist known as DJ Palmer, who is also my friend of many, many years, Dan Palmer. And so we're going to talk about the book, obviously, which is just fabulous. I actually read it. And really,
that's the classic with you got to wonder. I just can't believe how many books you read and how fast you read. But I sent it thinking, I don't know if he's going to make it to the end of the book. And I'm just glad that you did.
Well, it was one of those books where, I mean, I would have started it and got a feel for it, but then I was here at 2 a.m. on my sofa finishing it. So that is that kind of a book. But first, I'm going to ask you the question that I've asked every interviewee in the past 12 months is, how has the lockdown and the isolation thing affected you as a writer? Not medically. I don't want to know if you had it or not, or anything like that, but just this endless stasis and never going anywhere, never seeing anybody. Did that help or did it hurt?
Well, the sad thing is, in terms of my professional life and my writing career, I just didn't really notice that big of a difference. It was kind of like the same as it always was. Is that the talking head? Same as it ever was? Mm-hmm. Same as it ever was? You get up, you kind of make your way, coffee, maybe some little exercise, you walk your dog, you look outside, you wonder how you got here, you think, I don't have the skills to pull this off, self-doubt. Then you go on to the news, you see all the terrible stories in the news, you're riveted to what Andy Cuomo's dealing with in New York, and you're just kind of following it along, and then you shut it all out and you sit down and you start typing and you write your book. And I ended up writing, I wrote a book that's going to come out next year called My Wife is Missing. And it may be one of the best things I've written. And I don't know if it's because it's the pandemic or because I changed kind of a little bit of my style, but I found myself very creative, both with songwriting, which is a hobby of mine, and book writing, while I'm riveted to the news, while the president of the United States was taking up a lot of the news cycle. And so I felt very still in my creative element, even though the world was spinning upside down on its head.
But this one, The Perfect Daughter, you wrote before any of this happened, right? According to the acknowledgements, I even read the acknowledgements, and you said that this was completed before we all got locked down.
Yeah, I just read Connolly's latest, The Law of Innocence, and I loved how he handled COVID and brought it into the story, how it was kind of this little piece of menace that was lurking in the background, and it sort of reminded me of we didn't know what was going on, and the characters in Michael's book didn't know what was going on, and one of the characters ends up dying from COVID, the father of the um, of an assistant, a legal assistant, ends up dying of COVID. And as I was writing the book, my book, The Perfect Daughter, there was so much that's changed. There's a huge courtroom scene in the book. There's protocols around visits to mental hospitals that's changed. And the whole world changed. I would have had to completely handle the book in a different way. And I wrote it thinking, someday we're not going to have a pandemic. And I wanted the book to be more timeless than this moment in time.
Sure. And the courtroom scene actually is very hot. You really get the weather, you know, it is baking hot, sweaty, enclosed. And
it's like an incubator nightmare.
Yeah, a petri dish, you know, all of that would have been on Zoom or whatever. You would have had to completely rewrite the entire book. It would have been
the entire book. It just doesn't work. And you know, there was in the back of my mind this sort of worry that we aren't going back. I don't know what parts of society are going to return to the way they were. I don't know what they're going to allow in terms of courtroom spectators. I don't know if you're going to always have to be masked when you go into any building. I have no idea. I kind of wrote it hoping one day COVID-19 will kind of morph into a cold versus what it is right now, which is super deadly.
So I was, I mean, we'll talk a little bit, if we may, about the transition from Daniel to DJ, because I was deep into the book, and at one point I just sort of looked at it as a product, and the first thing you notice is there's no photograph of you. And so, I mean, am I completely wrong in thinking that this is kind of the reverse of what happens with a lot of authors who are women, who go to initials in order to get the cross-gender reader? You know, because this is a notorious thing in our business that men readers shy away from women authors. And so the women authors go to initials, and J is actually by far the most common second initial. I would love to understand the psychology of that. My daughter told me that Michael J. Fox is, his middle name does not begin with a J. His actual name is Michael A. Fox. But he thought, he started out thinking he was going to call himself Michael Fox. But Actors Equity has a rule that if another guy has the same name, you have to distinguish yourself in some way. So he was going to use his initials. But he couldn't use A because he felt it would be Michael, a fox. I mean,
he's right. I wouldn't have used A either.
Exactly. So he went to J, which like everybody does. Is J your real middle initial?
Yeah, J is my real middle initial.
Well, then,
my middle name is James. James. So yeah, Daniel James. And you know, I always feel weird writing you emails as Lee. I'm like, do I call you Lee? Because I don't know if everyone knows that.
Yeah, well, my real name is James as well, but there's a handful of people in the world. My brother basically is about the only one. Well, my brother and, you know, intimate, close family. My daughter just calls me Doof most of the time, and my wife calls me things even worse. So it's literally a handful of people use the name Jim. You know, everybody else knows me as Lee, and I'm completely happy with that. I mean, I have a thing about names completely. I was given my so-called birth name by two people that I did not know at the time. And when I did get to know them, I didn't like them. So why should I stick with it? It's a weird thing. The woman that did the tech work on my website, she just changed her name when she was about 30 or something. She just said, I want to be a different person. So she legally changed her name to something she chose. And I think that's a really cool idea. I think we should all do it, you know, when we're 18 or 21 or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would give myself a bad name. Like I would try to toughen myself up somehow, or I would, like rock it. Like I would try to come up with some cool
Troy Granite.
work. Yeah, something. And so I didn't come up with the whole DJ thing. But before we dive into it, I want to go back because I had this theory about you around the kind of the success of the Reacher books. And tell me if you think this is right or wrong, if I'm on the money or off the money. But did the books kind of start to go supernova around the time of 2001? When did Reacher really start to?
Well, that's a good question. And there were two huge hinges, and that was one of them for sure. 9/11 in 2001.
And my theory was that women started to read Reacher around that time.
Could be.
And
I think I always had a share of women readers, but yeah, at that time with the uncertainty after 9/11 and all of that, people wanted somebody they could turn to fix it for them. And so that made Reacher super popular. And then about 7 years later, with the financial crash of 2008 and 9, again, he got a huge boost because here was a guy that was completely unaffected. He didn't care. He had no money, didn't want money, didn't want possessions. He wasn't going to get foreclosed because he didn't own a house. And it just seemed so liberating. I think that was another huge hinge for me.
Yeah. So I think 90% of my readers are women, and I definitely get comments, oh, DJ, she writes these amazing books, and those are some of my, like, I love those. I'm like, yes.
Well, that was what I felt when I suddenly thought, I know you obviously, and I know therefore the person that wrote this book, but I thought if I divorce myself from that, this is certainly a book for women, and it could be by a woman. There was something about the focus and the sympathy that you got through the maternal line. The fathers in this book are fine, but the real emotional center is with the mother, and obviously the child is a girl. And without it being explicitly one way or another, it was totally connecting with women, I felt, and could have been written by one. So is my theory correct that the absence of a photograph and all of that is to not burst that bubble in the first instance?
I think it's more to not broadcast it. Like, we don't care if people know, oh, DJ's a guy, DJ's Daniel. It doesn't matter, but it kind of lends itself to, well, what you don't know won't hurt you, and it might help me. So that's how it kind of, because we've had those conversations with the publisher. I've had them with the publisher. I'm like, do you want my picture? And then I'm always like, oh, that means I have to go take one. So I'm kind of hoping the answer is no. And the answer, they're always like, no, it's okay. You don't have to do it. And I'm fine with that. And then, but just to kind of go back a little bit, the evolution of DJ is kind of interesting in relation to writing for women about women. I was, prior to this, so I started off writing these Daniel Palmer books, which, by the way, you, Lee, thank you very much again, gave me my first blurb for my first book. That came out in 2011. It was a book called Delirious. It was good. It was fine. It was a good book. But I hope that over the course of whatever number of years it's been, I've improved as a craftsperson, gotten better at my job. And so I did about 6 of these Daniel Palmer books. And then in 2013, my father, Michael Palmer, died suddenly. Michael, he was a huge pillar in our community, beloved by just so many, and was one of the founding, along with Tess Gerritsen and Robin Cook. Really, they kind of put medical suspense on the map. Really, Robin Cook the most. But then, my dad did great with it. And after he passed away, his publisher asked if I could write these Michael Palmer medical suspense novels, kind of that continuation. Who was doing it? At the time, Tom Clancy was doing it, Vince Flynn. who we had lost, Sieg Larson, BC Andrews. I'm sure there's a bunch I'm forgetting, but this kind of posthumous keeping that brand alive. And so they asked me if I could do that for Michael Palmer, and I thought, I'm not a MD. I was kind of an average bio student, but I just was like, I'll give it a shot. I'll try. And so I wrote this book called Trauma, and I reread everything my father wrote, and I went back in and dived in, kind of like a student of fiction again, but really also a student of my dad's. And I couldn't quite get his voice exactly the way he did it. It's just really hard to imitate somebody's voice. I think you may have said on a panel or somewhere, I just remember you saying it, but you could give the same premise to 10 authors. We're going to do it 10 different ways. That's why I never have a problem reading genre fiction while I'm writing a book, because I'm never going to do what somebody else does. I'm just going to do it the way I do it. And so I wrote three. I ended up writing 3 Michael Palmer medical suspense books. I wrote Trauma, Mercy, and The First Family. And then I was working on a book called Cruel Treatment. And it was about a girl who had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, or the mother had it. I'm sorry, Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And, really, or the book was really the question of, is the girl sick, or is the mother making the girl sick? And it was based loosely on a story that was in Boston, the Justine Pelletier trial, where a girl who had this mysterious ailment walked into a hospital in Boston, walked into Boston Children's Hospital, and she left 18 months later because she was taken into custody. She was held in the hospital, and her parents were basically, they lost parental rights from Department of Children and Families. It was a big story around here. And I thought, oh, this is good stuff for a book. So I wrote this book, Cruel Treatment. It was medical. It was going to be the next Michael Palmer fiction novel under that contract. And as I was writing it, I was starting to get nervous because it was really female, mother-centric, mother-daughter relationship. It was full of family dynamics. There was not as much kind of high stakes, that kind of thriller tension as much as there was the family dynamic tension. And it was really a story about relationships. And I turned it in to my editor. I was like, I think it's a good book, but I'm not 100% sure my father could have written it, or at least I am. This is really not a Michael Palmer book. And she read it and she loved it. And my editor was like, it's okay. We are going to change your name. You are now DJ Palmer, and we're going to publish this book as Saving Megan. And we want you to write more of these domestic family relationship kind of stories, because that's in your wheelhouse, and go and do that for us. And so that's what I've been doing ever since.
And did you agree with that? Did you feel that you had somehow come home to what you should be doing at that point?
Yeah, in terms of, did I feel like, oh, I'm in my element here? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely, I'm definitely of all the Palmers. My brother's a writer as well. He's a super high up there diplomat in the State Department. I believe pretty soon he's going to become an ambassador. That's just me. I think it's going to happen for him. I don't know if it does. I'm certainly going to be there visiting, telling everybody my brother's the ambassador.
Depends where it is, man.
Yeah, it depends where it is. If I have to be behind a lot of bulletproof glass in addition to my COVID protection, I might not be rushing to go there. But my brother and father are they're more similar in that they kind of have that the same sense of drama, and they get their drama from situation. So it's more situation driven storytelling. And my drama comes, I think, more from interpersonal relationships, my understanding of interpersonal relationships, or just how I think people relate to each other, and kind of bringing that to the page. So I'm a little bit more, that's just how my brain works. So I felt like, oh, this is a little bit more in my wheelhouse. I'm worried. I get worried sometimes that it's limiting, but I've been finding a lot of stories in this domestic suspense arena that it just seems like it's fun. There still seems to be a lot of fertile ground for storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's limiting at all, because what you've done with this is, I mean, it is essentially a classic thriller or investigative book, in the sense that from the reader's point of view, what really got me about it is it starts out, it doesn't make that terrible sort of faux attempt to grab you by the throat. It just lays out a situation, and then the next bit, and the next bit, and the next bit. And you are down a rabbit hole at that point, and you're never getting out. And what it actually turns into is a huge investigation where they are searching a gigantic landscape for clues. It's just that landscape is all inside a 17-year-old girl's head.
Yeah.
So it's got both things. It is family dynamics. It is deeply psychological suspense, but it is extremely classic investigation. What does all this mean? And normally you'd fly to Chicago to follow up one clue, and then you go to London, and then you go to LA or whatever, and you talk to this guy, talk to that guy. But what we're doing here is the fragmented, kind of tortured memories or half memories of coming out of this girl's head, which is startling in a way. To me, as a craftsperson, it was a lesson that the technique can apply to anything. The technique, the desperation of the reader to figure it out and know more, can be channeled through anything.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting you say that, Lee, and thank you, by the way. I mean, you're, not to do all the gushy stuff, but I'll just get a little gushy out there. Let's just throw it out there. But you're one of my, not only have you been, for me, a friend and a mentor and kind of a paragon of how to do the job right, but as a craftsperson, and just what you do with your books, I'm often just kind of in awe. So I read them and I'm like, damn, like just as a fan of somebody who does the same thing. Like we're both making a bowl or whatever, but I look at what you've created and I'm like, that is just awesome. And this is the first book, like with my debut, you kind of think you've got it. You think, oh, I know how to do this. I wrote a book, somebody published it. And then you find out, oh yeah, there's a lot of skill. There's a lot of mountain to climb. But this was the first time I felt like if I gave this to my writing friends, they would see it from a crafts point of view of how I constructed it, and they would say, yeah, good job, Danny. That's clever.
Yeah, well, that's exactly, I mean, it's so interesting you said that, because that's exactly what I felt. It was like, this is a guy who is on top of his craft right now, and also not afraid. You've got multiple points of view going on. The brother trying to cope with it by imagining it as a movie. How would he make this as a movie? And it was deft, is a very short word, but I felt there was none of that clunkiness. Most books you read, they're fine, they're great, you enjoy them, but you are aware of a couple of clunky little transitions or whatever. And you sort of tend, as a reader, you tend to say, yeah, all right, fine. I know you got to do that, but I wish you'd done it a bit smoother. But there was none of that in this. It was just really good.
The brutal part, because this book, it almost kind of broke me in some ways, because I had to deal with the mental health aspect of the girl who has dissociative identity disorder. And I'm not, obviously I'm not going to have that kind of that trope of, oh, the twist at the end is she has a mental illness, or the twist at the end is she has a mental illness but didn't commit the crime, but this person who you didn't think had a mental illness has a mental illness and they committed the crime. And I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to start with, she has a mental illness, she's been accused of this terrible crime. Let's explore what it means to have a mental illness, how you're going to be treated in the criminal justice system, how the criminal justice system handles mental illness, and how mental illness has these tentacle impacts out to the families, to the loved ones, to the caregivers. And then on top of that, I had to deal with the whole mystery element of the book, and to create a story where I'm not sure if it's a who done it or a why done it, because we're pretty sure who done it. It's the girl, it's the perfect daughter. And yet I wanted to create enough doubt in the reader's mind to say, well, what if it isn't the perfect daughter? Then who's it going to be? And are there going to be these clues for me to follow? And then I had to kind of create the world of the kind of the history of that mental illness, and really show the impact on the family, all while making sure that the book didn't have a drag to it, all while making sure that you're surprised at the end. And I ended up having to rewrite it a couple times because it was just too big a bite of an apple. I didn't quite realize what a bite I had taken.
Right.
You know, it's like that, you just grab that, you ever go out to eat and you just put too much in and you're like, I super regret that.
And somebody immediately starts talking to you right after that.
Right.
Yeah, but I felt it was, I think the thing that we all have to realize is that it is in the genre. And so you start out thinking, yeah, oh my God, this girl, she's totally screwed here. She did it, and what are we going to do? But at the same time, you got a voice in the back of your head saying, wait a minute, this is the mystery genre. Obviously, it's not going to be her. It's got to be somebody else. And then it depends on the fair and reasonable clues, which were there. And, you know, I'm pretty good at reading mysteries by now, and the clues are all there. There is nothing unfair about the story, but I would challenge practically anybody to figure it out. It is, it is not easy to figure out.
It's not, and it was something that I put a lot of effort into to say, okay, well, how can I make it fair and equitable, but yet you're not going to see what's coming.
Right.
And, you know, you're going to find those few people who are like, I got it. But even if you get it, you're going to get it maybe by a process of elimination more than you're going to really be paying attention to the clues as they appear in the story. But I could go back and point them out to you. And there's about 20 places where I'm giving you a pretty good heads up.
Absolutely. If you go back over it, it's in neon light, and you missed it first time around. And that to me is the perfect example. That is how to do it. You're absolutely fair and scrupulous. They're lit up bright, and the reader misses them, and they cannot complain afterward because they were given a fair chance. So, yeah, I thought technically it was sensational, and medically really interesting. You know, that is a really fertile, interesting thing. I mean, it must be awful I guess to deal with it is is worse than actually having it. Because if you have this DID, then you are sometimes not even aware of it. You're not even aware that you're suffering, but the people around you certainly are. And I absolutely love a book where you learn something along the way. You know, learn with a lowercase L, not a capital L. There's substance to it. It's about something, and you come out of the book having been thoroughly entertained, but you also feel like you're a more knowledgeable person now.
Yeah, and thank you, by the way, because I like the same thing. I like to learn something. I like to feel like I brought in not only my experience of the joy of reading, but I gathered some new nuggets of information that I wouldn't have had. And what was interesting about the research for The Perfect Daughter, so I have a psychiatrist in the family, and I was able to kind of talk to that person and get a vague sense of how it's treated, but the treatments run the gamut. Mm-hmm. And so what I realized I wanted to do was I wanted the first source material. I wanted to hear from people who have DID, who have lived with this condition, and then I want to hear what their experiences and their frustrations about people's interpretations of it, and I wanted to convey that on the page and just try to kind of undo some of the myths and the stigma around it. And because it has been sensationalized, it has been used, you know, we talked about Three Faces of Eve, Split by M. Night Shyamalan. There's Sybil, obviously, and, you know, it has appeared probably numerous times as that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, you know, split psyche. And as it turns out, there's a number of myths around DID that were consistent in all the videos that I watched of people who shared their stories of living with the condition, the interviews that I read. And I just thought, okay, well, this is easy. I'm just going to reverse engineer it. I'm going to take what they're saying as the myths, and I'm going to either show you how it really is, or I'm going to explicitly call out on the page, this is a myth. Don't think about it like this. Think about it like this. But do that while trying to keep the momentum going, not lose the story. And again, it was that, you know, that big bite of the pie or the apple there.
It's interesting that you got a psychiatrist in the family, because the psychiatrist in the book is a good guy, a nice guy, not untormented in himself, but he is, because you do feel that the criminal justice system, especially for the criminally insane, is a pretty awful and brutal place. And here's a guy who was trying to do his best.
You know, what's funny about that, Lee, that you bring it up. So I created this place called Edgewater State Hospital, which does not exist.
Thank God.
There is, however, a place called Bridgewater State Hospital, which is in Massachusetts. It's in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. It is part of the Massachusetts penal system, and it's really for men only. So I had to create a place where there'd be all ages, all, you know, genders, different levels of security. And I just started to try to invent it. And I'm thinking, all right, well, let's go do some research. Let's call around. Let's start and trying to find out about these prisons for the criminally insane turns out to be incredibly hard. They do not want to come clean with much information, and a lot of it has been privatized. So they've turned it over to corporations to run these institutions, and they are very cagey with what they will tell you and what they won't tell you. And so I ended up using parts of my imagination and parts of some case history where I found cases where guards used incorrect holds to subdue patients who were out of control, certain lawsuits that were filed. So I just tried all that in my research, and I cobbled this all together. And then, you know, the kind of the mortar in between was, I made it up, what we're allowed to do. And I've gotten a few messages from people who work in these institutions, work in these places, and they said, so impressed how accurate it is. And I described it pretty horribly, and I'm pretty sure it's a horrible place to be.
I'm sure it is. For a moment, I wondered whether Edgewater was a sort of coded Led Zeppelin reference, because wasn't it the Edgewater Hotel in Seattle where those awful scenes went on at the height of
Oh yeah. I'm going to just say that. I'm taking credit for it now. It's really clever. So yes, it's a Zepp reference coupled with Bridgewater State Hospital.
Yeah, it is. It was a tough place, and really she only survived, and the case was only unraveled because of that psychiatrist preparing to do his job, I guess we would say.
Well, technically, and this is kind of a sad thing, it really wouldn't even be his job. His job as a psychiatrist would be to give you pills and talk about, how does this pill make you feel? I'm going to up your dose. I'm going to change your dose. I'm going to try this new medication and move on. Because he was trying to crack the walnut of her psyche and pry out these bits of information, get through this protective persona alter and see if he could reach some of the other alternate personalities that had kind of hidden away in the because of this horrible place where the girl was being kept. He's using psychotherapy, and he's technically not supposed to do that. So I had to go back and give him sort of a fellowship in psychotherapy. I had to have a couple references to, you know, you do it different than other docs, and we're happy about that. You know, just to try to bring some kind of truth to what his job would be. But normally in these psychiatric hospitals, they don't have a guy like Mitch there trying to help you out and talk you through it.
Can we take it back to your dad just for a sec? Because,
yeah,
you know, he was a dear friend of all of us. I remember spending a great day with him up at Wesleyan University, where
where my brother went.
Right,
and
my daughter went there, and so we went up to do some kind of a event for them, and we just had the most lovely day. But he had issues of his own. And did he set up that support organization that is referred to in the book?
Yeah. So not only, it's great, Lee, that you bring that up. So not only, he didn't set it up. So the Physician Health Services, I believe that is what it's called, is part of the Mass Medical Society and the licensing board. So if you are a doctor and you are in trouble for pretty much a variety of, you know, it could be drug, it could be alcohol related, it could be behavioral issues, it could be mental health crisis, you may end up having your license suspended, and you have to go under contract to somebody like my dad, who would have monitored you as you are going through your recovery. And then they would deem you, okay, you've passed, you know, all of these tests and requirements, and you can go back to being a doctor again. We'll give you your license back. And the person my father worked for was a doctor named Dr. Steve Edelman, who is mentioned in The Perfect Daughter. And so that group and that organization, Physician Health Services, Steve just retired from it and has started on a new life. But they have a annual conference that's in my father's name. It's a, you know, honorarium there, and it's a lecture series, and it's given to medical students every year. They find a doctor who has had problems with drugs and alcohol, and they bring this person in to have a conversation. And essentially they have the same conversation to a different group of faces every year, but the context of it is or the content of it's pretty much the same. It's, you know, you kind of think, you begin to think you're a god because you can save lives and you can change lives, and drugs and alcohol will be there to remind you that you are human, and it will take you down like it took down me, like it took down all these other doctors. So that organization became hugely important to my dad because that was really his way of giving back. And I wanted to mention that in the book, and I created that Mitch character as somebody who had his own kind of demons to battle, his being depression and his son having an opioid addiction. And I did it not just to have a character trait. And again, this goes back to the craft, right? Mm-hmm. So I needed to have Mitch have something unique and special that would allow him to connect with the patient above and beyond, I'm a doctor, you're a patient. And here he is, he has his own mental health vulnerability, she has hers, and they could actually use that to find common ground as they're learning how to trust each other so that he could maybe reach her a little bit more. And so that whole story really fed not only kind of enriching that character, but also moving the whole narrative forward.
Sure. I mean, I believe that things like that are terrible if they feel bolted on. You know, if you picture the author scratching their head thinking, I've got to make this guy more interesting. Let's do this.
Right. He's got a mental health problem.
Yeah.
That
never works. It just never works. But this was so organic. It was partly somehow inevitable, but also surprising because it is a super high risk profession. I mean, doctors I know, a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, and a lot of access to pharmaceutical grade drugs and clean needles, right, and all that kind of stuff.
Right. In fact, it's unfortunately much more prevalent than people realize.
Yeah, I know.
And
And in a way much more manageable, because it's really the margins that gets you. It's the illegality and the bad stuff you buy on the street and the dirty needles that gets you. I knew a doctor who had been a heroin addict for 50 years. But it was all manageable because it was all pharmaceutical. He moderated his dose.
right.
He
Right.
knew enough to get by, and he had access to the good stuff.
Yeah, and now we're seeing therapies emerging where microdosing may be the cure for all sorts of mental health problems. So now we're moving to a phase where, like, well, you know, a little bit of LSD might actually.
That's my approach, actually. I figure a little bit of everything can't do you any harm, and some of it might help.
I don't disagree. Let me ask you something, Lee. So I'm going with, you're not retired. I know Andrew has been kind of given, I don't know how he handled it amazingly, because the last book was incredible. But how's he handling it? How are you handling it? Are you doing the same thing you always did, or what are you doing now?
I'm pretty much, my problem is I get bored really quickly, and I've never really been into anything longer than about 10 years ever. And I've done 24 years as a writer and loved it, loved every minute of it. But my problem was extreme self-awareness. I don't fool myself about myself. And right at the beginning, really before books, when I was in television, I made myself a promise that I would never phone it in, because I hate that. I hate consuming somebody else's phoned in stuff, and I just couldn't bear the thought of being that person. So I made myself a promise I would never phone it in. And I just felt it's coming. It's maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, but pretty soon I will be phoning it in, because the way I write is no plan, no outline, no nothing. Every single word is a high stakes choice. And then all the promotion on top of that, it was just wearing me out. And I thought, pretty soon I'm going to be not giving 100%. And I did not want to be that person. And so, I just said, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop now. And the publishers obviously were upset. And it's so funny, actually. Because the first actual people I told face to face, I had to go to London to get an award. And so the next day they took me out to lunch, and I knew they were going to ask me. There was my publicist, who was a woman, my editor, who was a woman, and the CEO of the company, who was a man. And, inevitably they said, well, come on, what's the next one? Can we do another contract? And I said, I'm not doing any more. I've had enough. And the two women were super nice about it, very human about it, very motherly in a way about it. And the guy was panicked, of course it's his bottom line he's got to worry about. But it was hilarious. Within 10 minutes, it went from plan A, plan B, plan C. And plan A was I'd come to my senses and change my mind. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And plan B was, well, just write the book and we won't ask you for anything else. No, nothing, no touring, no anything. And I said, I don't believe you. You're not going to stick to that. And then he thought for a minute, and within 10 minutes of the entire conversation starting, he said, well, your style is pretty easy to imitate. We'll get somebody else to do it. And so I thought, actually, as you said before, in relation to your dad, it's actually not nobody's style can be imitated. I mean, I think you can get sort of 95% of the way there, but the final margin is just some kind of personal insanity that is idiosyncratic to the author, and you can never reproduce that. But I figured Andrew probably could, and so I said, "Do you want to do it?" And he said, "Yeah." And last year's book was good, I agree, but you should see this year's book. Oh my God, it's really good. And my worst.
Do you help? Like, do you give them any Like, how does it work when you guys work do you work together
Well,
at all? Do you look at?
the theory is, yeah, we're supposed to be doing it like nose to nose over the desk, but of course, COVID has not helped with that because we're not in the same bubble, and neither one of us is a good collaborator. I mean, I'm strong-willed. Andrew is the most stubborn and obstinate individual you will ever meet, and so it's kind of difficult, but it works. It's worked pretty well, and. I think when people look back on it, they're going to see that last year's book as a kind of throat clearing from him. I mean, it was really good. I think it was solid, but this next one is sensational.
Can we get a title? Do we have a title?
The title is Better Off Dead.
I swear to God, wait, what did I write in my song to you? I have to look this up because I think that was the title I used.
It could well have been. Yeah.
It was.
We should tell the people watching the background to this that a few years ago I got the Thriller Master Award at the ITW banquet, and Dan did this sort of song sequence, all based on Beatles songs, because he knows I love the Beatles. The Beatles are so important to me. So they were all parodies of Beatles songs with titles like 8 Blurbs a Week and Reacher with Pie in the Diner. It was absolutely a fabulous night.
It was when I was really panicked because I had to do this song, and it's sort of like writing the books. I have to be endearing but funny, but also, give you a couple little jabs to kind of knock you back down to size. We get it. You're a lead child. You're as big as it comes in this business, but we'll help you. And I was just struggling. I didn't have anything at all. And then when I just remembered, I'm like, oh, Lee's into the Beatles. Lee loves the Beatles. What could I do? And this was all the Tom Cruise controversy around, could Tom Cruise be Jack Reacher? And, you always had these great lines like, Tom Cruise is the biggest movie star in the world. So I think, yeah, he could be Jack Reacher. It's fine with me. But the song lyric, Tiny Jack Reacher, just popped into my head thinking about that, and put it to the tune of Paperback Writer. And
it was honestly one of the nicest nights of my life. It was my Sally Field moment,
it was awesome.
You didn't fly, so remarkable.
Well, I
think we should call Patrick. Go ahead, Daniel. I think at some point we need to get Patrick in case we have questions that you guys can address.
Oh yeah, sure.
Is that okay, Patrick? You're going to come back, and there you are.
Yeah, this has been such a great discussion.
I know. I hate to break into it, but I hate not to let the fans have a moment to talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you've got a lot of.
I just want to throw out before we turn over to anybody that the moment I had this vision in my head of the entire ballroom singing, the end of Hey Jude, na 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 na, hey Lee, and I was like, let's just do it. And I think I stopped playing the guitar and I started to sing, and I was going to start saying, come on, everybody, do it. And everybody just was doing it anyway. And the whole ballroom was singing, and Lee came up to get the award. And I was like, this is just going to be one of the best moments of my, career as a writer, just to be a part of that and to be someone who could help to honor you. So it was terrific. And I'm so grateful and glad that you agreed to do this with me tonight, Lee. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. And I will say that was one of the greatest nights of my life. It was one of those things that you don't dream about because it's absurd, but if it ever happens to you, you're in a ballroom of people who like you. It is just fabulous.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Is that out there on video somewhere? Can you see it?
I think it is. It's probably on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you Google Tiny Jack Reacher, there you're gonna find it.
Well, you've got a lot of people watching, including, I believe, Dan, your mother is on here.
Okay, well, let me do a quick shout out to my mom.
Yeah.
Love you, Mom. You're the best. I'm very grateful. She's awesome. My mom is my first reader, always. She is not like, she is the sweetest, nicest, most lovely person you could meet. But you give her a red pen, and all bets are off. There are times like there's been just these huge X's through something I've written, just the whole thing, and she would just write on it, bad page. I'm like, all right, Mom.
I love that.
What, really an area where my mom has helped out tremendously has been the kind of, does it ring true? And there's only so much I can do as a writer who's male, writing for a female audience, because there's just parts where I'm gonna write something that's very much towards my gender and my way of thinking, and there are different ways of thinking that men and women have. I believe it's been documented, and it's been so helpful to have that perspective as a really in-depth first reader, to make sure that I'm bringing that truth. And as I've done it now over the course of a number of books, it's starting to become more natural for me and easier for me. So this book that I wrote during the pandemic, where I still didn't bring the pandemic into the story, but that's okay. I think I'm optimistically believing it's going to be over. It was actually easier to a lot of the emotional component was easier to do, because I've been trained by Mom. So thank you, Mom. You're the best. Happy Mother's Day. An early shout out from your devoted son.
Sarah Gillespie mentions a Zoom that you did really early on in the pandemic, and what is kind of a spontaneous sort of Zoom, it sounds like, from what she's saying, and just how special it was, and how she just is really praising that, and how great you are.
Oh, well, thank you,
Yeah.
Sarah. I'm not
Yeah.
sure I remember the Zoom in question. Probably, I think I do know that one. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Sarah. That's kind of you.
It's been a Zoom-filled year.
It has.
Let's see. Janine says, how much research did you need for this new book? You've talked a little bit about that, but.
Yeah, it was bonkers. I mean, for me personally, so Lee, you do no research, right? Do you?
Not for a particular book. My pretentious answer to that is everything in a writer's life is research. Everything you ever read, every person you ever meet, every movie, every TV, everybody you talk to, you're going to learn something that will sometime be useful. But I don't think, okay, I'm going to write a book about this and then I research it. Because to me, I'm too lazy, and also it would be too fresh. I feel like I need to digest it first.
Right,
Yeah.
so let me say that if any of you are interested about writing process and what Lee has to say, Lee and Laurie King are the editors of an MWA book called How to Write a Mystery. And Monday, I think it is, Monday at 6 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, Laurie and Lee will be with us here on our Zoom. And it would be really, if you're interested in the writing process and so forth, it'd be a really great event for you to tune in on Monday,
Yeah,
the
for sure.
26th at 6 and see what Lee and Laurie have to say.
Yeah, that's a fact. I'm really excited to read that collection myself. Yeah, I wish I could do what you do there, Lee, and I couldn't with this book. I just felt like, well, I guess I'll put it this way. I write, and then when I don't know the answer to something, I find the answer, and then I keep writing. So I don't, and then sometimes I find out something, and then I have to go back and undo what I did because I guessed wrong. And it can be really hard to talk to an expert because they don't think like a thriller novel. They think like an expert, and so they tell you all these things, and a lot of times you want to say, well, what you're telling me doesn't work for my book, so yeah. I really don't want to take that. How else could I do it? And my dad, actually, he had a kind of a motto that I've used over the course of my writing, which is it doesn't have to be probable, it just has to be possible. So I will research until I find something that proves what I'm saying is possible, And that example that I used with Mitch, the doctor who's doing both psychiatry and psychotherapy within the prison system, that isn't probable. It's not common, but it's possible. So I'm like, good enough. And so the majority of the research in this book was around dissociative identity disorder. And I did that research mainly to make sure I didn't perpetuate a myth. And I also did it so I could educate you, help you learn lowercase L. I love that, Lee, through the book.
Daniel, did you bring up, or you may have, forgive me if you did, that documentary series about the woman who specialized in dissociative identity disorder with lots of high-profile cases?
Yeah, is that the one that was just in the New York Times?
I'm not sure.
I believe
so,
it just.
Daniel.
Yeah, that I believe that came out after I wrote this book. So the day I wrote this book, I can't remember her name. She was a TV star on it may have been a reality show. I'd have to go back and look her up. She came out as having had dissociative identity disorder and said she didn't want to be shamed or stigmatized for it, that she's been integrated. And the thing to know, so I'll get this out there to anybody listening who hasn't read the book yet, it used to be called multiple personality disorder because the thought was that you had multiple personalities within inside. So you had the main personality, the primary self, and then it fragmented into these multiple selves. But what they realized is it's all one personality that's broken apart and it's almost always caused by childhood trauma. And the different fragments of personality serve as coping mechanisms so that the trauma doesn't actually have to be have happened to the primary self. It could be offloaded to one of the alters. And the idea is that you're supposed to take these fragments of a single personality and integrate them back into the primary self so that would be kind of the healing. And this woman came out and said she had that integration on the day this book came out, and about a few weeks before, the New York Times announced that docu-series that I think you're talking about, Patrick, with about DID. So it's kind of coming more and more into the consciousness, and people believe that it is as common as schizophrenia, but yet it's certainly less. You hear it and you're like, really? Is it? But it is.
Here's a question for both of you from Lisa. She says, what is the best piece of writing advice you've ever received? And what is one essential piece of advice you would give to beginning writers?
I'll go with Lee first.
I think the most essential piece that I ever received it's a short motto. It says, don't get it right, get it written, which is a bit like Dan was just saying, you can go back and fix things. Or Harlan Coben says, you can fix bad pages, with reference to your mom. You can fix bad pages. You can't fix no pages. And so get it written. That is the best piece of advice that I've ever received. The best advice I would ever give is ignore my advice, because a book has got to be an organic thing with a beating heart of its own. And it can only really work if it's the product of one personality, one mind. And if you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, wait a minute, Dan Palmer does this later in the book, Lee Child does it at the beginning, Stephen King doesn't do it at all. If you start thinking like that, then you're doing a committee decision and you're lost and the book will be awful. You've just got to do what you believe in. If you're 100% happy with your book, then it's a success. Because even though you're an individual person, you're not that different from everybody else. If you love that book, there's going to be 1,000 people who love it, maybe 10,000 people. If you're a very normal person, then there might be 1 million people who love it. But you've got to love it first. You can't write it for somebody else.
Yeah, that's great. That's so true. I can't remember who was saying this to me the other day, but they kind of laugh when I say, I write a book and it's going to come out, and I'm like, oh yeah, this could be the book. This is good. And like I always think, oh, this could be the book. because once I'm done with it, I think, well, I did my job and I'm happy with it. And I want this book to be out there and I want people to read it. If you don't at least have that feeling, you really shouldn't. You should keep the book to yourself and don't try to publish it. And that kind of leads to the advice that I love, which is kind of twofold. One being, it's hard. It doesn't seem hard because you look at a lot of our books and most of every page, you're going to know every single word on that page. So there's not going to be this crazy vocabulary that you have no idea what they're all the same words and they're all words that you know. And it just seems like, well, it's something you should be able to do, but it is a craft and it takes a long, long time to begin to even learn how to do it. When I said that I'm going to be a published fiction writer, I had a best-selling novelist for a father. I grew up around story. You would think, oh, well, that should be easy. From the day I said I'm going to do it to the day my first book was published was about 12 years. And there was probably in that time, 1 million plus words written and thrown away. And it's hard. And then the other piece of that, it's hard, is you have to be fearless. So you have to, once you're satisfied, you have to have no fear of putting your book out there and saying, go and read it. You have to be able to take the zingers, which you're going to get. Lee, do you look at your reviews? Do you check any of them?
All of them, and I never forget them either. I had one that said, I think it was about my 7th book. It said, I hated this book. I'm sorry I read it. I wish I could unread it.
Love that. Yeah, Patrick and I did a really interesting conversation last week with Sarah Weinman, who is the new crime critic for the New York Times. And it's running on our website on the homepage right now. But we talked about, reviewing, because there's a whole thing to that that I find really fascinating. And Sarah said she spent her whole life preparing for this. And we talked about, how she's gone about it. I looked up the documentary, and it's called Busy Inside.
Busy Inside,
new
that's right.
documentary about this, and there's somebody called Marche who's a lead in it. But anyway, Busy Inside is something that, if you're really interested in this DID disorder, would be an interesting thing to watch.
Sure.
I also want to give a shout out to your brother, Matthew. We were lucky that Matthew was here with all of his books. Your dad was here, so forth. I thought Matthew did a wonderful job. His last book, of course, I can't remember the title because I can't remember any titles anymore. It was really fabulous. And I was so sorry that, that he then retired into, more in
he'll come back.
I hope he comes back and writes more, because and he's so different than you. It's really interesting.
Yeah. We're incredibly different. I don't know if Lee and Andrew, you guys have some similarities, but you're pretty different, I would say. But
Well,
you guys both have.
We're separated radically by age. I mean, that's the thing. And that's what the whole idea at the handover was. You can keep, he's me 15 years ago with that sort of old energy that I used to have. And given the age difference, I mean, he grew up in a different world than I grew up. So yeah, we're different in a lot of ways, but DNA wise, we are absolutely similar. I mean, I feel like if I was kidnapped and I was being held in some East German dungeon or something like that, and I had a split-second opportunity to text one word to one person that would lay down a breadcrumb, he is the person I would text, because I know he would get it.
Oh,
What
for
would
sure.
the word be?
Patrick, anything else?
Yeah, what would the word be, Lee?
I don't know, depending on where we were, but it would be some cryptic clue to it, and he would get it, whereas nobody else would.
Yeah. My brother and I are similar. We have a similar sense of humor often, or we could riff on the same material. But when it comes to writing, we both have our father's sensibilities. I think Matthew a little more so than I now, because I've switched really into this domestic suspense genre. But with my brother, brings to his books is 25 years of experience being a diplomat. So he really knows the geopolitical climate. And so when you talk about learning with a capital, with a lowercase L, a lot of times you read one of my brother's books and it can be like learning with a capital L, because there's so much information in there that you can get, but he still has a good sense of story. So he'll come back at some point, I'm sure.
I hope so.
By the time he comes back, I'll be checking out. That's what I think will happen.
Barbara, do you remember when we had Daniel and his brother at the store?
And
That
his
was,
father. Well, they all came.
that was great.
It was a wonderful night. We had all three Palmers, and there were guitars and there was music and great conversation. It was wonderful. It really was. And I have a question for Lee, which has just occurred to me. Did you know David Cornwell, John le Carré at all?
I've met him, at all the usual industry events and stuff like that, but I didn't know him well.
I'm asking because he did a video interview a couple of years ago before he died. And Rob, my husband, was walking, I was listening to it, and Rob was walking by and he stepped into the room and he said, "Why are you talking to Lee Child?" And I don't know if you ever noticed it, but you and John le Carré have almost identical voices. And even the way you shape your words and so forth, it was remarkable watching it. And I thought, well, there's no other transfer maybe, but the voice.
Have you ever seen us in the same room at the same time?
So this is you, the doppelganger of David Cornwell. I love it. Patrick, is there a final question we should end up?
Yeah, I think our friend Tori Eldridge, terrific writer in her own right, she says, "Daniel, it sounds as if you're incorporating a bit of the medical knowledge into your latest psychological thriller. I also really enjoyed your novel, The First Family. Do you have any plans to write more medical thrillers, or do you think you'll stick with the DJ Palmer books for the meantime?"
Yeah, right now I'm sticking with DJ. So it's what's up next. It's good. I can tell you what I'm working on next. It's a book called My Wife is Missing, and a little kind of a funny thing about the story. So it's a true story that last February, at the start of the pandemic, I was with my daughter. We were on a ski vacation, and I was walking down kind of this the little catwalk area and at the hotel where we were staying, and outside one of the rooms in this frigid northern, in the middle of nowhere ski country place, on the ground was a teddy bear, just covered in icicles and snow. And I looked at and it was just down this long hallway, and there's this bear, and I'm like, oh, that is just creepy. Like, what's this bear doing here? I was like, that's going to be the premise of some book. And I think it was probably a couple months later, when I was trying to think of an idea for a book, I thought, well, what if the guy comes back to his hotel room, sees this bear on the floor, picks up the bear, like, my kid dropped the bear, goes into his hotel room, everyone's gone. Wife's gone, kids are gone, the luggage is gone, and he's holding a bunch of pizzas going, where is everybody? And that's the start of the next book, My Wife is Missing. And the answer to where is everybody definitely will take you on a ride.
Wow. Wonderful premise. I love that.
Yeah.
Back to Lee's point at the very beginning about the lack of photograph and so forth. If you look inside The Perfect Daughter, the only books listed by you are The New Husband and Saving Megan, as they're Daniel's medical thrillers and so forth are not listed in these books. I think it's all part of this persona. So I'm really glad that Lee brought it up, so you will recognize that DJ Palmer has written more than, in fact, 3 books, a 4th one to come, but other books as well. You will know when you have achieved radical success, because then they'll put all your other books under all your other names in the book. But right now,
that's my goal. Achieve radical success and then do what Lee did and just say, okay, that was good, enough.
Well, it's been a wonderful conversation, gentlemen. Thank you so much for just a remarkably fascinating evening. And
awesome.
I'm delighted, Daniel, that you were able to join us. Thanks for signing copies of The Perfect Daughter for those of you who would like to order one. There will be a podcast of this event available tomorrow or Saturday in case you'd like to recommend that to people. And the video of this will live forever on our Facebook video page at voiceoflife.com, so you can share it with people. So thank you, Lee. It's lovely to see you. I'll look forward to seeing you on Monday night with Lori to talk about how to write a mystery. So for those of you who are interested, come and bring notes. It'll be, note-taking stuff. It'll be great. So good night, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Patrick. Lee, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.
Real pleasure. Great to see you.
You too. Bye.
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 Bye.